Hello. Some years ago, when I was going through rather a rough patch in life, a very good friend said to me, George, sometimes you have to close a door before another door can open. And that comment stayed for me for a long time. And I've often thought, is there some truth in this folk wisdom, in this saying, which probably many people can recognize as being helpful? And recently, I've been seeing how can I combine this with my mindful photography into my practice as a biographical counselor. So I'm George Perry. I live over in the Stroud area, and I've been working as a counselor now for about 15 years. The format of this presentation will be a PowerPoint, which I'll introduce in a minute. And so the question for me was, could we work with the notion, the image, the metaphor of doors opening, doors closing as a way of trying to understand life's events, particularly the more difficult ones? So I'll move on to the presentation. Okay, so doors closing, doors opening. I think it fits very well to phenomenological photography because we're working with the photography in the sense of the images, the photographs we take of doors in various situations, but also as a metaphor for looking as a way in, a doorway, interestingly, into looking at life's events and the meaning that we can find in them, particularly in terms of how those events have taken on self-knowledge, self-awareness over time. So first of all, let's think about opening and closing. This is obviously a very nice meditative exercise to look at your own hands. You've probably done this before, but I think it's a very nice way to the client sort of understand, get a feeling for these two gestures. So on the one hand is closed, and the other, which has this gesture of being contained, being with oneself, being protected, to strengthen ourselves, maybe even challenge things. And the other one, the right hand there, the gesture of openness, of giving and receiving. We need to be open to other views. We need to be open to other people. We need to be open to taking opportunities in life. If we look at doors in particular as a kind of opening and closing, doors and, as I'll show you, gates and windows also have the same function. They're on this liminal space. They're on this in-between. So we're this side of the gate, but we can see something beyond, something further. And herein lies the challenge of the door. Do we go through the door? Do we keep the door shut? Is the door inviting? And so on. But this in-between space is often where many clients are. Do I take this choice, this move, or not? So doors have many meanings. Every day we open and close doors. It's from this space into the next space. It can be from into a sacred space. It can be the boundary of public and private, myself and the other. It can be between light and dark, and of course, life and death as well. And every day, very immediately, we walk through a door of some kind. And whether a door of consciousness, a new kind of thought, a new idea, a new initiative, or the actual entrance to the door of our home, it permits or it prevents. It can open or it can close. It can stay closed, it can stay open. And we could say that the door symbolizes transition, metamorphosis. It represents the beginning, an opening, a birth, exiting one state of being to the next state of being. How I was before a situation, an event, how I was after, and what came from that. What were the consequences? The door signifies the start of the new, while at the same time, importantly, it indicates an ending. So here's some photos, some images of doors. So doors can be very important helps. It creates something third, you could say, in the conversation with the client, as well as the experience of taking the photographs themselves. And doors can evoke rememberings, past situations. Maybe the door is familiar. Maybe the door reminds one of something. Doors can be a very key part of storytelling. They are metaphors for change and metamorphosis. And they're the place of transition, the place of the in-between. So we have doors opening, many kind of doors. What is the invitation? Are we welcome to move through the door? Sometimes doors are closed. I've done quite a bit of work in China. In China, there are big, heavy doors. And there's a door ajar in front of you. Do I go in? Do I not go in? Do I cross that threshold? Do I stay where I am? Doors that are locked, doors that are open, doors which have wise sayings on them to prepare you. I mean, it's very interesting visiting Buddhist temples in China, that when you walk in, you go over a lip, you have to step over into the space, which is a really important consciousness awareness that one is entering a holy space. It's also, it can be windows to look out, windows to look in, windows to protect, to keep the wind out, but windows to breathe from the outside. And reflecting on our photos that we take of windows and doors can be very evocative and remind us of things, things to do with emotions about the present, maybe questions that we have in life, maybe rememberings from the past events. But they can also be gates as well. They're another kind of door. And they can be quite jolly and beautiful. Or they can also be barbed wire gates as well, of course. But these ones are very inviting, I think. How to use this more therapeutically is ask the question that when we look at different things as setbacks in our life, while we're difficult at the time, when we later look back, we can sometimes or quite often find that that created a space for something new and valuable to take place. For example, the ending of a relationship made possible the meeting with a new spouse. I had a plan in my work, and illness scuppered that. I had to take another course, or I failed my A levels and I took another route, and or the redundancy meant a new direction in my work life. I didn't seek it; it came to me, it happened to me. But later, there seems to have been some point in that. So we can look back on our biography and see how a door closed only for a new door to open, perhaps later. We tend to think in terms of cause and effect, things sequenced from the past. Something happens, has a consequence, an effect. We can also look at it perhaps the other way around, which is from the future backwards, and we see the effect first. I've had my new spouse, whatever. The cause was the breakup. So sometimes we can look at effect cause. If we took from the future, we can make sense of what has happened. Now, James Hillman said something very interesting. He's a psychologist. Many of you may have read his work. And in looking at our life, it's easier to accept the story of heroic self-made development than the story that you may well be loved by this guiding providence, that you are needed for what you bring, and that you are sometimes fortuitously helped by it in situations of distress. May I state this as a bare and familiar fact without quoting a spiritual leader? Why not keep within psychology proper what was once called providence, being invisibly watched and watched over? So our prevailing view is that life is something that we create. It's driven from ourselves. What he's suggesting there is maybe there's a higher self or a higher force, a higher power, whatever one word would use that works for you. For him, he called providence. We are, in a way, there is a wisdom, a wiser self behind what happens to us in life. Now, if there was time, we could do this exercise, but it's something, it's quite a useful little exercise if you want to try it later. So you think about a time in your life when someone rejected you, or you missed out on something, or when your big plan, your ambitions collapsed. This would be a point where in life where your door closed. Now think about what happened afterwards. What happened later? What doors opened, perhaps as a result of that door closing, or it made a possibility available. What would never have happened if the first door hadn't closed? And you can ask yourself, you can ask yourself what actually happened and what came from that. So the door that closed on me was a certain event, and the new door that opened for me was another event. And you can reflect on these, what led to the door closing, what helped you open the new door, and so on. How easy or hard was it for you to realize that a new door was opening? Did I realize that at the time? What were the effects of the door closing? Was there a degree of pain, but was there also a degree of relief? And what came from that? Did you develop your character through this? And quite an interesting one with the client is there a closed door you still wish to open? What would you need to open a new door? So that leads us into the future. Something the philosopher Rudolf Steiner said, which is another way of looking at it, similar to Hillman's in a way, that we can get a sense, one can learn to perceive in oneself something that appears to be the psyche as a second inner being, a second self, or a higher self, or in Jungian terms, self with a big S. Something that becomes particularly apparent if we connect it with thoughts that show us how we bring about, maybe unconsciously or minimum consciously, a set of destined circumstances in ordinary life. After all, we can see that a particular circumstance would not have arisen if we hadn't behaved in a certain way in the past. And in this way, we can learn to look on strokes of destiny with composure. We see them approach us without prejudice. And yet we also see ourselves in the being who brings these events towards us. So that is something to think about as a possibility for myself. I find that the important thing is the client comes to find a meaning of consequences in life, that the door closed, the door open is something that was beneficial. However, the everyday self would not have chosen it at the time. And this can help face the future, it can help build resilience, and so on. And finally, there's a saying in China, slightly different. When one door closes, a window opens. And the saying goes, when fate closes a door for you, it also opens a window for you. Thank you.